Story 1, submitted by Caleb R. from Letcher County, Kentucky. I should start by saying, I've lived my whole life out in the hills. The kind of place where the nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile down a gravel road, and the only real noise at night is the shifting of the woods. I grew up with the usual stories: coal camp ghosts, panthers that scream like women, lights that move where no road runs, but none of that ever bothered me. When you've lived in the dark long enough, you get used to the way it breathes. This happened 3 winters ago, during one of those weeks when the temperature drops so low the air feels brittle when you inhale. My fiancée had left for a night shift in Pikeville, so I had the house to myself. Around midnight the power went out, not uncommon, and the place went dead quiet except for the ticking of the wood stove cooling down. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside to check the breaker. The moment the door shut behind me, I felt something off. Not threatening at first, just wrong. The dark didn't settle the way it normally did. It felt stirred up, like something had been moving through it right before I stepped out. Our house sits at the end of a long, straight yard that leads into the tree line. In daylight, it's peaceful, but at night, it's just this black wall. I shined my light across the yard. Breath came out in clouds that hung still in the cold. Everything looked normal. No movement, no deer kicking up leaves, no stray dog nosing around the trash cans. Just the wind brushing the dead grass. I was halfway to the breaker box when I heard it. A slow, deliberate crunch of leaves coming from the tree line. Not a scurry, not a hop, a step, a heavy one. I froze, kept my light pointed at the house so I wouldn't blind myself by swinging it too fast. Another step followed, then another. The kind of pace a person uses when they don't care if they're heard. Something about it put a pressure in my chest. I finally turned my flashlight toward the woods. Nothing. But the steps didn't stop. They came right up to the edge of the yard, just outside the beam of my light, like whoever, whatever. It knew exactly how far I could see. "Who's out there?" I called, because saying nothing felt worse. My voice sounded strange in the cold air, like the dark muffled it before it could spread. The steps stopped. Silence stretched out so long I began to think maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the cold was messing with my ears. I knelt, opened the breaker box, and pretended my hands weren't shaking. That's when the steps started again. But this time they weren't in front of me. They were behind me, close. The kind of close that makes your shoulders tense on instinct, like you're waiting for a hand to grab you. I spun around so fast I dropped the flashlight. It hit the ground and rolled, its beam wavering wildly across the yard, the trees, the side of the house. Nothing. 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 But the steps continued, pacing slow circles around me, never catching the light, never stopping. I snatched up the flashlight and ran back to the house. I don't remember unlocking the door, just slamming it behind me and throwing the deadbolt. The noise stopped instantly, like it had never been there at all. I stood with my forehead against the cold metal of the door until my breathing slowed. Eventually, I convinced myself it was a deer or maybe a bear. I didn't believe it, but it was the best lie I could live with. The lights didn't come back on until nearly 3 a.m. I stayed awake the rest of the night on the couch with the TV on mute, watching the windows. Over the next few days, I tried to go back to normal, but every night when I stepped outside to get wood for the stove, I felt eyes on me from the tree line. Not imagined, felt. Like the sensation of heat on your neck when someone stands behind you. Then, on the 5th night, something new happened. It was around 11. I stepped outside with my arms full of split logs. The yard was still, the air thick with fog. Far off, a dog barked just once and went quiet, and then I heard it again. Crunch. But not in the woods this time. In the yard. Halfway between me and the trees. I froze. The logs slipped from my arms and thudded onto the porch. My breath came out in a shaky burst that fogged up the air in front of me. But as the fog drifted, I saw something in it. Not a shape. A gap. As if something tall was standing between me and the yard light, blocking part of its glow. Not enough to see clearly, just enough to know it was there. Then it moved. Not toward me, just a small shift, like it leaned its weight onto its other foot. I backed into the house so fast I tripped on the threshold. I slammed the door, locked it, and turned every light on, even though the brightness made my head hurt. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I walked the yard, heart hammering in my throat. No footprints, no tracks of any kind, no sign anything had been there, except in the frost near the tree line, I found a single long, narrow mark, like something had dragged the edge of its foot in a slow arc. It wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I knew. I haven't slept with the lights fully off since that week, and when the power flickers, even for a second, every hair on the back of my neck stands up. Because whatever walks here when the lights go out, it learned exactly where I live. Story 2. Submitted by Marlene H. from Baker County, Oregon. I was 26 when this happened, living alone in my grandparents' old farmhouse at the base of the Elkhorn Mountains. It wasn't a pretty property. More gray field than grass, a leaning barbed wire fence, and a house that creaked like it was still settling even though it had been there since the 1940s. But rent was cheap. And after a messy breakup, cheap and quiet sounded like salvation. It took me exactly 3 nights to realize quiet can be its own kind of threat. The first time I heard it, I was brushing my teeth before bed. That faint clicking sound outside my bathroom window. The small rhythmic snap of something touching glass. I tried to ignore it. Rural places make weird noises. Loose gutters, swaying branches, the whole list of shrug-it-off answers. But the next night, it happened again. Same pattern. 3 soft clicks. Pause. 3 more. The timing was too perfect to be the wind. I stood completely still, toothbrush hanging from my mouth, bubbles of mint foaming on my tongue. I waited, counted my breaths. 3 clicks. Pause. 3 clicks. I edged to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. Pitch black. No moon. No porch light. Just a solid sheet of dark that looked thick enough to swallow anything that stepped into it. I closed the curtain and told myself it was a loose shutter, except the farmhouse didn't have shutters. The realization hit hard enough that I slept with the lamp on that night. The third night is when it changed. It didn't start at the bathroom window. It started at the back door. I was in the living room, wrapped in an old quilt, flipping through channels I wouldn't remember the next morning. The sound reached me through the commercial break. Tap, tap, tap. A knuckle on wood. Not pounding, not demanding, just testing. I muted the TV. The knocking came again, slow and deliberate. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the door. I couldn't make myself get up to look through the peephole. I just kept listening as the taps grew softer, almost playful, like someone dragging a finger down the doorframe. After maybe a minute, the sound drifted along the siding toward the kitchen, then to the laundry room window, then the bathroom, like it circled the whole house. That night I slept with every light on. The next morning I found nothing on the porch. No footprints, no scuff marks, no signs anyone had been there. The frost was unbroken, the ground undisturbed. But on the bathroom window, above the point where I'd pressed my fingers to the glass the first night, I found a faint smear. Not greasy, not muddy, just wrong. A slightly darker patch of condensation with 3 perfect lines cut through it, each one about 2 inches long. I cleaned it immediately, trying not to think about how precise those lines were. Too straight for an animal, too close together for a person's fingers. That night, the clicking didn't come. I thought maybe whatever it was had moved on, but the quiet didn't feel like relief. It felt like breath held too long. Around 2 a.m., my bedroom door creaked. I shot upright in bed, heart slamming into my ribs. The door was open just an inch, and I could see the hallway, dim from the nightlight I'd plugged in. Something moved past the doorway, not a shape, more like the shadow of one. A dimming of light and then nothing, like something very tall had passed in front of the nightlight for just a moment. I waited for footsteps. None came. I listened for breathing. Nothing. I finally forced myself out of bed, bare feet on cold floorboards. I walked down the hallway with my back pressed to the wall, light buzzing faintly at my shoulder. The house felt occupied in a way it never had, like air displaced by another body, a presence taller than the doorway frames, wide enough that you could sense its outline even when you couldn't see it. I reached the living room, empty. But something about the room felt deeper, like the dark had stretched further into the corners. Then a soft sound came from behind the couch. 3 clicks. I didn't look. I ran. I grabbed my truck keys, bolted out the front door in nothing but a t-shirt and sweatpants, and didn't stop running until I was behind the locked doors of my pickup. I drove straight to my parents' place in town and slept on their couch with every light blazing. The next morning I returned with my dad. We searched the whole house. Nothing out of place. No signs of entry. No broken windows. No tracks. Nothing. But in the living room, on the wall behind the couch, 3 small marks were etched into the paint, each line perfectly straight, perfectly parallel, 2 inches long. I moved out the next day. I've never gone back, not even to drive by. My cousin rents the place now, and she says the farm is peaceful. But a few months ago, she called me late at night. She sounded embarrassed, almost apologetic. She asked if I'd ever heard tapping on the windows out there. I didn't answer, because sometimes something walks around that farmhouse after dark, and it hasn't forgotten the shape of my house, or the shape of me. Story 3, submitted by Ryan M. from Fremont County, Iowa. I used to work overnights for the county road department, winter plowing, emergency tree clearance, the odd late-night call when a stretch of gravel washboarded so bad folks couldn't get their trucks down it. The hours weren't great, but the solitude suited me. Out there in the middle of the fields at night, it felt like the whole world went quiet enough for you to actually think. Until the night I realized the quiet was listening back. It was early February, sleet spitting hard enough that it pinged like nails off the hood of the county truck. They'd sent me to check a remote stretch of old Waubonsie Road, mostly farmland, and one abandoned grain elevator the county never bothered tearing down because no one wanted to buy the land. Families said that whole mile was bad luck territory, which usually just meant it flooded too easily and got muddy faster than we could maintain it. Still, I never liked that road. Even in daylight, it felt like something about it was hollow, like a place that had been emptied out, not by people leaving, but by something else insisting on the space. I hit the road around 12:30. Ice mist blurred the beams of my headlights. Everything beyond them was just a smear of gray-black fields. The elevator rose out of the dark like a skeleton ribcage, tin siding peeling in curls. I slowed when I saw the obstruction. A thick limb from one of the cottonwoods had fallen across the road. Nothing unusual. I parked the truck, left the headlights on, and pulled on my gloves. The air was so still it felt heavy, like sound couldn't carry in it. I fired up the chainsaw. The growl of the engine snapped the stillness, and I felt relief at the noise, stupid as that sounds. I cut the branch into manageable chunks, kicking them off the shoulder. It took maybe 10 minutes. When I shut the saw off, the silence hit so hard I felt dizzy. No sleet, no wind, no ticking from the truck's cooling engine. Nothing. Then, from behind me, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on gravel. Slow, intentional, coming up the road from the direction of the grain elevator. I turned, breathing shallow, squinting into the flooded glare of the headlights. There was no one there. But the footsteps kept coming. Crunch, pause, crunch. I backed toward the truck, one hand out like I could feel my way through the air. The footsteps stopped about 20 feet away, right at the edge of the light. "Hello?" I said. "If you need help, say something." Nothing. Just a faint creaking from the elevator, like something shifting its weight. Then the footsteps started again, but this time they didn't walk toward me. They spread, like whatever made them was widening itself, stepping in 2 directions at once. The gravel shifting left and right, the sound splitting, pulling apart until it felt like something massive was unfurling out of the dark. I jumped into the truck cab and slammed the door. My hands shook so hard I fumbled the keys. The headlights flickered as the engine coughed back to life. For a second, just a fraction, I saw something move at the edge of the light, a distortion in the sleet. A tall, hunched silhouette, whose arms hung too low and whose legs bent like they weren't made for standing on flat ground. Not a shape you could describe, more like the suggestion of one. But when the headlights steadied, nothing was there. I reversed so fast I nearly slid into the ditch. I spun the truck around and floored it, driving back toward town with my breath fogging the cab. About a mile down, my radio crackled. At first, it was just static. Then, through the static, I heard something underneath, a faint grinding sound, like gravel being shifted beneath slow, heavy steps. "Dispatch?" I said, my voice cracked. "You reading me?" Static, grinding, then something like a low, drawn-out exhale right beside my ear, though the radio was a foot away. I killed the radio. I drove straight to the Public Works office and refused to go back out that night. I told my supervisor something was wrong with the road. Equipment malfunction. Unsafe conditions. Whatever lie would get me off duty. 2 days later, another guy was sent out there for drainage assessment. He quit before finishing his shift. Said he kept hearing someone walking behind him, matching his steps until he stopped, then taking one more step. Just one. Like it wanted him to know it was a little closer than before. The county finally closed that stretch of road last year. Too many accidents, they said. Too much erosion. But every time I drive past the barricades, I swear I can feel something leaning close to the truck window. Not touching the glass, not making a sound, just waiting for the lights to fail long enough for it to finish taking that last step. And someday, when it does, I know exactly whose name it'll whisper first. Story 4, submitted by Joanne P. from Upshur County, West Virginia. I've lived my entire life tucked between two ridgelines where the mountains fold in close and the fog clings low enough to brush your shoulders. Folks around here say the valleys remember things, voices, footsteps, tragedies, and sometimes they repeat them back when the night gets quiet enough. I never believed any of it. Not until the winter I took the night caretaker job at the old Crestline Retreat. It used to be a church camp back in the 60s. Rows of bunkhouses, a mess hall, a chapel, all arranged around a dead fire pit where kids used to roast marshmallows and sing those hand-clapping songs nobody remembers anymore. When I started working there, the place was half abandoned and used mostly for off-season hikers who wanted cheap lodging. My job was simple. Keep the wood stoves going, check the doors, walk the grounds twice a night. The grounds were what got me. My first night at exactly 1:14 a.m. and the floodlights on the dining hall clicked off. Not flickered, clicked, hard, like someone flipped the switch. Then the ones along the path went out one by one, like they were being covered as something passed in front of them. I told myself it was faulty wiring, and I might have believed that if the darkness hadn't moved in a straight line toward the woods. 2 nights later, around the same time, the lights dimmed again. But this time, instead of going out fully, they pulsed. Long shadows stretched across the field like arms reaching from tree to tree. When I stepped outside to check the breaker, the wind died so completely the smoke from my breath hung in place like a suspended veil. That's when I heard the footsteps, far off at first, deep in the pines. A slow scraping gait, not quite a limp, not quite a drag, something in between, the kind of steps made by someone who knows they won't be stopped. I swept my flashlight across the field. Nothing. But the footsteps grew louder, closer. Scrape, step, scrape, step. I backed toward the dining hall door, forcing myself not to run. Running felt like the exact thing whatever it was wanted. For a full minute, the footsteps circled the building without ever revealing themselves. The sound moved with the precision of someone mapping a room, learning its entrances, testing its corners. When the noise finally faded, the lights came back on all at once, bright enough to sting my eyes. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the office with the radio on low, listening to static until dawn. The next night was worse. A hiker was staying in cabin 3, a quiet guy from Ohio who'd signed in with a weary smile and a backpack that had seen better days. He kept to himself and went to bed early. Around 1 a.m., I decided to check on the cabins, partly to make sure he was warm, and partly because I didn't want to be anywhere near the dining hall, when the lights started misbehaving again. The path was coated in frost, each crunch of my boots louder than it should have been. Cabin 3 sat closest to the woods, its back wall practically touching the tree line. I knocked lightly on the door, expecting no answer. But the man inside whispered, "Do you hear that?" His voice was thin and shaking. I pressed my ear to the door. At first I heard nothing but his ragged breathing. Then, faint but unmistakable, scrape, step, coming from behind the cabin, right against the wall. The hiker whispered again, "It's been doing that for an hour." My heart thudded so hard it hurt. The footsteps scraped their slow loop around the cabin, rounding to the front. Then they stopped. The porch boards flexed, just once, like something very heavy had set its weight down. I backed away slowly. My throat felt tight, the air too thick to swallow. I didn't have a weapon, not even a radio on me. Just a flashlight whose beam shook with every tremor in my hand. The doorknob on cabin 3 clicked. The hiker screamed, not from the door opening, but from something pressing against it from the outside. The wood bowed inward, just half an inch, but too steadily to be a person leaning. More like the weight of something tall trying to test how much force the structure could take. Then the footsteps resumed, circling again, slow and patient. I shouted for the man to stay away from the door and ran back to the main office for help or a phone or anything. When I returned, the footsteps were gone. Just silence stretching between the trees. But the man in cabin 3 had packed and left before sunrise. He didn't check out, didn't sign anything. He just vanished, his bunk still warm. The next week, 2 more guests reported hearing footsteps outside different cabins, always between 1 and 2 a.m., always circling. As winter deepened, the thing moved closer to the main buildings. Sometimes the floodlights would flicker as though something tall passed beneath them. Sometimes doors I had locked would be ajar in the morning. Sometimes I'd find long, thin marks in the frost. Not footprints, not drag marks, but arcs, as if something was pivoting, turning slowly to face a new direction. The final night I worked there, I sat in the office waiting for the clock to hit 1. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I wanted to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. Right on schedule, the lights outside went dead. Total blackness, the kind where even your own hands disappear. Then from the path outside, scrape, step, much closer than before. Then again, scrape, step. My breath froze in my throat. I didn't even dare touch the flashlight. I just listened as the steps approached the office door and stopped. The doorknob turned. Slow, slow, slow. I pressed my back to the far wall, tears slipping hot down my face. The knob clicked back into place. Then, so softly I almost thought it was my imagination, a long, deliberate exhale pushed under the door, cold enough that it curled across the floor toward me. When the lights returned, the footsteps were gone. But on the wood floor, inches from my boot, the frost had melted in the shape of a tall shadow standing over me. I quit that morning. The camp sits empty now. Locals say it's because of funding issues or vandalism. But every so often, when I drive past the ridgeline at night, I swear I see the floodlights blink off in sequence, like something is walking the grounds, tracing the old paths, learning them by heart. And I know one thing for sure. Whatever moves out there when the lights go out remembers me.